You've heard Ms. Hayes' testimony. Did you bring another woman into the apartment for which Ms. Hayes was still paying half the rent in direct violation of your agreement?
We were just friends.
Friends don't wear your ex-girlfriend's bathrobe and sleep in her bed. You violated your own agreement. You created an uninhabitable environment for Miss Hayes, and then you had the audacity to take advantage of her decency. In fact, you and your new girlfriend should have a very nice time in the apartment you'll be paying for all by yourself.
The air in courtroom number 7 held a suffocating stillness. 22-year-old liquor store manager Liam Peterson is suing his ex-girlfriend, 33-year-old Vanessa Hayes, for unpaid rent. Tammy is counter-suing for harassment, defamation of character, and for the loss of her job as a security agent. Well, Mr. Peterson, according to your complaint, you and the defendant were in a romantic relationship and rented an apartment together. You both signed the lease. Midway through that lease, Ms. Hayes moved out. You are asking that she be held responsible for her share of the rent for the remaining months of the contract. Is that correct? Liam took a deep breath, trying to modulate his voice to sound credible. He recounted his story, the words carefully chosen to paint a picture of an abandoned man, a victim of impulsiveness. He said they moved into the 2-bedroom apartment on August 15, 2000, filled with hopes for a shared future. He stated that Vanessa had abruptly moved out around the middle of March after having paid the rent for that month. Therefore, he was demanding payment for April, May, June, and July, a total of 4 months' rent. He said this with a voice laced with feigned injury, as if his heart had been broken along with the lease agreement. Judge Carter listened, her expression unreadable. "All right," she said when Liam had finished. "So who is living in the apartment with you now?" Liam blinked, seemingly caught off guard by the question. He admitted that he now had a new roommate. "I found a roommate," he said. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Good. When did you find this person?" "On May 1st, Liam replied. "And is that person paying rent?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Perfect," Judge Carter said, her voice edged with sharp irony. "Then our issue here, Mr. Peterson, is not 4 months of rent. The only month in question is the rent for April. You cannot expect to collect rent from both your new roommate and Ms. Hayes for the same period. You certainly don't think that's fair, do you?" Liam began to flounder. His initial plan to demand a large sum to punish Vanessa was crumbling before his eyes. He stammered, but she broke the lease. She just walked out and left me stranded, facing eviction, with my credit on the line." He tried to elicit sympathy, to play the victim once more. Judge Carter was unmoved. "Why are here to talk about money, Mr. Peterson? About your actual financial damages. Right now, the only possible damage is the month of April. We will get to why Ms. Hayes left in a moment, but for now, let's talk about this roommate, male or female." "Male," Liam answered. "A friend of yours?" "Not really, just a new acquaintance. I met him and said, 'Hey, you need a room?' And he said, 'Yes.'" Liam tried to make it all sound very casual and simple, but Judge Carter had already seen the first crack in his story. She turned to Vanessa. "Ms. Hayes, it's now time for us to hear your side of this. Why did you move out? And why do you believe you are not obligated to pay for the month of April?" Vanessa took a deep, steadying breath. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she began to tell her truth. She explained that they had broken up in January, but because they were both tied to the lease, they agreed to try and live together as friends until it expired. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, so it was theoretically possible, but there was a crucial condition, an unwritten but morally binding agreement. "We had a deal." Vanessa said, her voice hardening, "A promise that as long as we were both paying rent there, I would not bring any other men into the apartment. and he would not bring any other women. She continued describing how this fragile arrangement began to fracture. Liam, the man she had loved, started a new relationship online. Night after night, Vanessa recounted, it would sit at the computer talking to this girl in Chicago. His giggling, the whispered phone calls that went late into the night, it became a form of emotional torture. I was living in a home haunted by the ghost of another woman. By February, she could no longer stand it. She told Liam she had to leave. I couldn't live like that. I felt like a stranger in my own home. She explained that she planned to move out in mid-March and had been decent enough to pay her full share of the rent for that month, even though she would only be there for about 10 days. She had even intended to pay for April's rent as a final gesture of goodwill to give Liam time to find a replacement. I wrote a check for April's rent, she said. I sent it to him. Judge Carter turned back to Liam. Mr. Day, did you have an agreement that neither of you would bring a member of the opposite sex into the apartment while you were both legally responsible for it? Liam hesitated. One, when we were both living there, yes. Judge Carter shook her head, her impatience growing. Don't play word games with me, sir. At the time you two sat down and made that agreement, you both intended to live there until the end of the lease. You did not anticipate her moving out. So there is no way you said, hey, this deal only applies while we're both physically here. But if the presence of my new girlfriend makes it so unbearable that you have to leave, then I'm free to bring her over while you still pay the rent. That's preposterous. That's idiotic. And because it's idiotic, I don't believe it ever happened. Liam fell silent, his face flushed with color. And then Vanessa revealed the first twist, the detail that had turned her disappointment into rage and led to the cancellation of the check. I moved out on March 10th, she recounted. The check for April was sent. That weekend, I needed to do my laundry, and Liam had said I could come back to the apartment anytime. He wasn't home, so I let myself in. And that's when I saw them. Saw what, Miss Hayes? Judge Carter inquired. The photographs, Vanessa said, her voice catching. Pictures of her, the girl from Chicago. Her name is Roxane, but they weren't just any pictures. They were taken inside our apartment, the apartment I was still paying for. There were pictures of Roxane wearing my bathrobe, posing on our bed. There was a picture of her sitting on the kitchen counter where I used to make my coffee every morning, legs crossed, smiling smugly for the camera. And the worst part, there was a picture of her and Liam toasting with wine glasses, using the crystal set my mother had given us for Christmas. The room was silent. The brazenness of the act hung in the air. The pictures were dated. Vanessa continued, regaining her composure. The first week of April, right after he would have received my check, he brought her into our apartment, into my safe space, and celebrated on my generosity. I felt betrayed, humiliated. I picked up one of those disgusting photos, one of Roxanne lounging on our sofa, and I wrote on it in my lipstick parasite. I left it on his desk, and the next Monday morning, I went to the bank and put a stop payment on the check. I called the landlady and told her exactly what happened and why. All eyes turned to Liam. He looked like a cornered animal. All the false confidence was gone, replaced by a weak defensiveness. Judge Carter looked at him, her gaze as cold as ice.
You've heard Ms. Hayes' testimony. Did you bring another woman into the apartment for which Ms. Hayes was still paying half the rent in direct violation of your agreement?
We were just friends.
Friends don't wear your ex-girlfriend's bathrobe and sleep in her bed. You violated your own agreement. You created an uninhabitable environment for Ms. Hayes, and then you had the audacity to take advantage of her decency. In fact, you and your new girlfriend should have a very nice time in the apartment you'll be paying for all by yourself.
Liam was stunned, a mixture of anger and shame on his face. But this was only the beginning. The real battle was just about to start. Judge Carter adjusted her glasses. Now, we will move on to Ms. Hayes' countersuit. Ms. Hayes, you are suing Mr. Peterson for harassment, defamation, and loss of employment. Let's begin with the harassment claim. Vanessa recounted the series of events after she moved out. Liam wouldn't leave her alone. He called her daily, calls that started with feigned words of longing and regret, but quickly devolved into jealous accusations. When I had my new roommates moving in, both men, he would hear them in the background and start making crude remarks. Vanessa explained. He'd say things like, "Oh, you must be having fun with your two new boy toys." He insinuated that I was a promiscuous woman. The harassment culminated one Sunday. Vanessa needed some rental application forms that Liam was holding. She had asked him to bring them to her workplace, but he had angrily refused. "No," he said, "you're not allowed at my job anymore. I'll bring them to you." And he did. Vanessa continued. I was in the basement, and a friend of mine, Dan, was upstairs. Liam barged right into my house without knocking. Dan can testify. He stomped dramatically through my living room, stormed down the stairs, threw the papers at me, and yelled, "Here's your damn stuff!" Then stomped his way back out. Judge Carter listened intently. "That is not harassment under the legal definition, Ms. Hayes," she said flatly. "That's bad behavior, it's rude, and it's childish. But it does not rise to the level of legal harassment. What else?" "Yes," Vanessa said, her voice turning grave. "The worst part. A week after I stopped the check after he sued me, he did something unforgivable. He sent an email to my place of work. This was the heart of the countersuit. Vanessa handed the judge a printout of the email. Judge Carter read it, her eyebrows knitting closer and closer together. "Your Honor," Vanessa said, "that email was sent to the Director of Human Resources and my direct supervisor. At the time, I worked for a major security firm. I had worked my way up for 2.5 years and was on the verge of being promoted to a regional manager position, a position that came with a $10 a year raise. It was a done deal." Judge Carter looked up from the paper. "Mr. Peterson, did you send this email?" Liam nodded reluctantly. "I had to. I felt threatened." "Threatened?" Judge Carter repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Enlighten me. This email states that Ms. Hayes is emotionally unstable, that you feared for your safety, and that she had threatened to blackmail you. Tell me about this blackmail. What did Ms. Hayes threaten to tell whom?" Liam took a breath, preparing to launch his biggest lie. "She threatened to call my brother. My brother had been helping me out financially, giving me money for bills. She said if I didn't drop the rent lawsuit, she would call him and tell him what the money was really for." "And what was it for?" Judge Carter asked, her eyes boring into him. "For bills." Like I said, Liam insisted. "Then why would that be a threat? If your brother was giving you money for bills, and she threatened to tell him you were using the money for bills, that's a meaningless threat. Were you afraid she was going to tell your brother something else, Mr. Peterson? Were you using that money for another purpose, one you didn't want your brother to know about?" A heavy silence fell. Liam didn't answer. He just stared at the table. Judge Carter turned to Vanessa. "Ms. Hayes, look at me. When you said you would call his brother, what were you going to tell him? Were you going to say he was using the money to buy drugs?" Vanessa shook her head. "No, Your Honor. Not to buy drugs." She paused, then delivered the bombshell truth. "To grow them." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Lamb's head snapped up, his face pale with shock and fury. Vanessa continued, her voice now full of power. In the closet of the second bedroom, Liam had set up a small hydroponic marijuana growing operation. Lights, ventilation, the whole system. The money his brother was sending, he lied and said it was for increased utility bills. But it was really to finance his illegal side business. I threatened to tell his brother the truth. That wasn't blackmail. That was my outrage. The second twist had landed, and it was more shocking than the first. Liam's claim of blackmail was now completely exposed. It was not the act of a scared victim, but a preemptive strike by a criminal trying to silence a witness. The email he sent wasn't a genuine warning. It was a malicious act of revenge designed to destroy the woman who knew his secret. Judge Carter read the email again with a new understanding. There is another sentence in this email, she said, and they wish to remain anonymous so that she, Vanessa Hayes, does not come and shoot me. Mr. Peterson, did Ms. Hayes ever threaten to shoot you? No, not directly. Lime stammered. But it's what I was afraid of. In my mind, I feared she could do it. Oh, in your mind? Judge Carter said, the contempt in her voice undisguised. So you aren't accusing her of making a specific threat. You are simply sharing your paranoid fantasies with her employer. A very clever way to plant a seed of doubt without telling an outright lie, isn't it? Vanessa then described the fallout from the email. She was immediately called into a meeting with HR. An internal investigation was launched. They said that any threat, however implied, had to be taken seriously. She explained. The entire incident was entered into my permanent employee file. A few weeks later, the new director, the man who was set to approve my promotion, started. He was there for 4 days. On the 5th day, he called me into his office and fired me. What was the reason? Judge Carter asked. They called it restructuring. Vanessa replied, but I know the truth. My record was perfect until that email arrived. It poisoned the well. It turned me from a star employee into a potential liability. Judge Carter sighed, a sound filled with wariness and frustration. Ms. Hayes, she said, her tone softening slightly, this is a tragic situation. I believe every word you've said. Morally, Mr. Peterson is entirely responsible for your job loss. His actions were despicable. Legally, however, my hands are tied. She explained, to win a defamation case that results in financial damages, you have to prove conclusively that the defamatory statement was the direct cause of the damage. You would need a witness, that new director, to come in here and testify under oath that the only reason he fired you was because of Mr. Peterson's email. Without that testimony, I cannot legally award you a judgment. Your word, as credible as it is not enough to meet the legal burden of proof. It's a harsh legal standard, and I am sorry, but you have not met it. Vanessa bowed her head, tears finally welling in her eyes. She had told the truth, exposed every lie, but the legal system, with its rigid rules, could not give her complete justice. Judge Carter looked at Liam one last time, her eyes delivering their own sentence. Mr. Peterson, you may have escaped financial liability on this countersuit, but make no mistake, everyone in this courtroom knows exactly who you are. A liar, a manipulator, and a coward. You destroyed a good woman's career out of spite and to cover up your own illegal activities. It is a disgrace. She brought the gavel down for the final time. Hayes' countersuit is dismissed. This court is adjourned. As they left the courtroom, the cameras were waiting. Liam, in a final act of shamelessness, managed a smile.
I'm just glad to be out of this madness.
He said, still trying to play the victim. I would never involve someone's career in a personal dispute. Vanessa, though heartbroken, was not defeated. The breakup was between us, she said, tears streaming down her face. But he crossed a line. Legal justice may have been constrained, But the moral truth had shone through, exposing the rotten core of a dead romance and leaving all who witnessed it with a lingering sense of outrage.